A few weeks ago, Lisa and I had the opportunity to go out to dinner with some friends. It had been a long stretch at work, and I'd been working at the church all day and into the evening working on a new stage design. So when the time finally came to leave to go over for dinner, I was tired and I was thirsty. I was so thirsty. Have you ever been in that place where you're so thirsty that you can just feel it in your throat and your mouth kind of feels like a tennis ball? And when the water finally comes, you drink it so fast that your stomach hurts, a little bit? Well, that was me that night. So we sat down to the table and the waitress came over and introduced herself, and she asked if she could get everybody drinks. And I jokingly said, "Yeah, bring me the biggest glass of water you have in the house." And she did. She came over quickly with waters and left, and then a few minutes later she came back to see if we were ready to order. Well, when she came back, my glass of water was empty, and so was Lisa's, because I drank hers too. So she quickly and kindly filled them both back up. A few minutes later, I'm not sure how many minutes, but she came back again and both of the water glasses were empty again, and she jokingly said, "Would you like some more water?" Well, in 2 Kings chapter 4, we find a story where a man named Elisha, who was a prophet, encounters a woman who's going through a difficult bout with debt. Her husband, who was a prophet, has just died, and now this woman finds herself struggling with debt so badly that her creditors are threatening to take her 2 sons to pay off her debt. So as you can imagine, she's terrified, she's exhausted, she's empty. So during their encounter, Elisha discovers that this woman, all that she has to her name, all that she has in her possession, is one small jar of olive oil. So after he discovers this, he makes an interesting, and I would say an odd challenge to her. He says, "What I want you to do is I want you to take your 2 sons and I want you to go out into the streets and I want you to borrow empty jars. And I don't want you to just borrow a few empty jars, I want you to borrow as many empty jars as you can find." And the scriptures tell us that she agrees and she does what he commands. And he says, "Not only do I want you to borrow the jars, but when you get them, I want you to take them back to your house, and I want you to take the olive oil that you have, and I want you to pour it into all the empty jars that you can find." And again, the scriptures say that she went out and did as he commanded. So they go out and get the jars, they get every jar that they can get their hands on, and they bring them home and they bring them into the house, and she shuts the door behind them. And as he commanded her to do, she begins to pour the olive oil that she has into all the empty jars that she was able to find. And the oil flowed. And the oil continued to flow. It flowed until all of the empty jars were filled, because in verse 6, she asks one of her sons, "Get me another jar, get me another jar." And he says, "All of the jars are filled. There are no more jars." And at that point, the scriptures tell us that the oil stopped flowing. That up until that point, the oil flowed in response to capacity, because God always flows in response to capacity. That emptiness provokes filling. That the oil flowed into all the emptiness that she was able to bring into the house, because God specializes in empty. He specializes in empty. Now, those people who think that they have it all or think that they know it all rarely experience much with God, because they perceive themselves to already be full. But the more you realize how empty you are without God, or the more you humble yourself and empty yourself before God, the more capacity you create to experience His presence. So the question is, how much space do you have? How much capacity do you have to experience the presence of God? How much capacity do you have to receive wisdom? Or better yet, how full are you on all that you think that you know? How much capacity do you have in your heart to experience and encounter a living God? Because Jesus himself said in Matthew chapter 5 verse 6 that that person who thirsts and hungers after righteousness, that person will be filled. Because God specializes in empty. This woman had many needs and only one jar of olive oil. She had many empty jars, but one jar of olive oil. That she shut the door behind emptiness. And when the time finally came to open the door to tell Elisha all that had happened in the midst of her house, her emptiness, her jars, her needs were all filled to capacity. That night, as much as I drank the water was as much as she poured out. That every time I emptied my glass, she returned to fill it up again. That every time I needed water, she was there to refill. And how much water she poured that night had nothing to do with her willingness to provide. It had everything to do with my capacity to receive. So my challenge to you today, before you go and do anything else today, before you start your day, my challenge to you would be to just simply stop. And maybe for the next minute or two, just to quiet yourself and quiet your heart, maybe even to close your eyes and to simply think of those areas in your life that you're on empty. To think of those areas of your life where you desperately need to experience filling. Or maybe there's an area of your life where you have it all, or maybe you think that you know it all, that you're good, that you're fine, that you don't need anything or anyone. I would challenge you to rethink that. I would challenge you maybe to humble yourself and empty yourself of all that you think that you know, so that you can experience all that God has to provide. Maybe there's an area in your life where you think you're full that God really wants to challenge you. Maybe there's an area of your life where you think you have it all or know it all that He wants to correct you in. He's only able to fill the areas of your life that you empty, that you bring empty, that you allow yourself to be emptied before Him. Because God specializes in empty. And His desire is that you would be filled.